friends, you're listening to the Shattered Ceilings podcast with your hosts Stephanie and Adriana. We're here to discuss the importance of mental health from the perspective of two first-generation immigrants. Join in weekly as we dive into important topics such as relationships, parenting, and cultural barriers. Here, we get real and candid as we explore what disrupting the status quo looks like for each of us. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. Before I start, this is my first episode back after giving birth, so I definitely missed doing this. And
I missed you.
Oh, I hope so. You were great. You came to visit and brought me treats. And
yeah,
it was
Baby
awesome.
Archie's here. That's all that matters.
Yeah, he's sleeping in a room, so if you hear crying, just ignore it. But before we start, I do want to introduce our special guest today. We have Jason on the podcast, and we're so excited because he is a licensed associate marriage and family therapist, which is so cool. And I kind of want to say how we know each other. So we've been friends now for, I don't know when we met, 2000, before COVID. Everything to me is
it was like a convention year.
The convention before COVID.
19,
My timeline is always like anything before COVID.
Yeah, it had to be 2019.
Yeah, so we met at a typical Romanian convention. And yeah, I remember we like hit it off talking about just you going to school to become a therapist. I think at that time I was actually in therapy, and I thought it was so cool that
you always have therapist friends.
I know, that's a good sign.
Maybe it's you gotta go to
I know, going back. I'll go to school. No, I don't have time. But yeah, it was cool because we talked about therapy, and then obviously life goes on. And I kind of want you to share the story of how you're in Arizona. And yeah, I'll just leave it to you. It's a cool story.
Yeah, so I think when you found out that I was going to school for marriage and family therapy, you were telling me, oh, my therapist is a marriage and family therapist. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But then you were like, oh, she's Romanian. And I was like, another Romanian marriage and family therapist?
Very rare.
Right? And obviously from our community, coming from like the Baptist Pentecostal community, that is extremely rare. But when I heard that, I was like, okay, like I need to connect with her. So I remember you connected me with her, with Anka.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and then I spoke with Anka in like the end of 2019. It was like September, October, and just introduced myself. We talked for like an hour and a half, just about mental health, about life, about, just we,
you can talk forever about
forever. And that was it. We just had a beautiful conversation just to introduce each other. Like, just, hey, I'm on your radar. You're on my radar. Let's collaborate at some point. And then life went on. I was in private practice at the time. And then the next year, no, this was in 2021 now. She reaches out and she actually texts me at a very opportune time. I was looking for a change in my life. There was a lot of things going on, and she reaches out to me like the next day after I had some personal things going on, and she said, hey, do you want to come to Arizona and join the team at Hope Counseling? And I was like, let me give you a week to think about it. And we talked about it, and everything worked out, and I ended up here that July. So I've been here for a year and a half now. I've been working for her in private practice, and now that's shifted a little bit, but we can talk about that as well later.
Yeah, he moved from Chicago and got a job.
You were the domino.
Got married. I don't know why you didn't bring that up. I thought that was
so the same convention that we became friends at, that was the same convention that I ignored my wife at unknowingly, and then that ended up becoming a thing. So yeah, I got married. We got married in the last year. I moved to Arizona, got married, got a new job. We just found out we're pregnant, actually. We're doing our gender reveal tomorrow. No, it's not an announcement. The people who need to know.
Yeah, that's true. That's awesome.
And so there's just been like all the major life stressors that somebody can go through, we've gone through, and we're still here, so.
Go to conventions, no, I'm kidding.
Like Tisha says,
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, gosh. I love that though.
Cool. What a small world. So you were the domino that set it off for him to get connected with Anka.
It's whatever's meant to be. I feel like don't
brush it off. Don't brush it off. This is how God uses people in people's lives.
Yeah.
Like, we all have a role, and you don't know how big or small your role is. And I truly believe that, like, my role in other people's lives I won't ever know for the rest of my life. But sometimes moments like these happen, right? And you were clearly a connecting factor in all of this.
That's so
cool.
And like, we haven't even kept in touch that much,
I was going to say,
right?
for like those last 3 years, we never spoke. And then randomly I saw you in Arizona and you're like, I live here now.
Yeah.
With Anka, your therapist. I'm like, wow, that is, it is a cool story.
So it's just, it's one of those incredible, intricate spider webs that God puts together in one way or another. And you're just like, what?
Mind blown,
Here we are. You're on our podcast.
So
that's
cool.
That's so cool.
I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah, we did bring you here mostly because you are a therapist. So we love talking about mental health. And then another thing that's very big in general, especially in the Romanian community, is you're a guy who's a therapist, which we're obviously going to get into. So we're going to start off with the first question. How does being a male therapist influence your approach to addressing mental health concerns in male clients?
Yeah, great question. All the questions you guys sent me were incredible.
Good job, Steph.
I will start off by saying that being a male helps first and foremost. Just being a man in the room already, sometimes guys come and they have their walls up. Being another man, sometimes they let their walls come down. Sometimes they put their walls up even more because they're like, well, no, I definitely don't want to be vulnerable. But most of the time, being a man helps. Because I think as men, we have a different type of authority with each other. And I've even seen it where a man has gone to a female therapist and just resistance, reluctance.
Wow.
And then he comes to a male therapist and not that you can play these games with a woman, but you can't play the same games with a man, especially if he's willing to be direct with you. And I think that's probably one of my personal strong suits is I'm very direct with my clients. So that's another thing that I think allows me to connect with men just in general. But I also recognize that I once too was very resistant to therapy, mental health, like all this. I mean, the journey to get here was really tough for me. And I think that I did receive a mixed bag of support on one end of people like, what a great thing. And then a lot of people like, dude, that's a field for wimps, wussies, right? To use clean language. And so being on the other side of that, I remember my first experience going to therapy thinking like, this is so dumb. I feel like I'm like, why am I going to therapy? Am I suicidal? Like, what is this? And I felt kind of like off by it.
I think most people feel like that. And that's why they put off therapy for so long.
Yeah. And so recognizing all of, resistance, what I call, is it's like an onion. It's an onion of resistance because it's not like, okay, you just peel it back like a banana and there's the fruit. It's layers of resistance from like our Eastern European culture, layers of resistance from just being a man, that macho and manly mentality. Another layer of resistance of, I don't want to look weak. I don't want to look, whatever. And so you got to consider all these different layers that play into, and I think being a man automatically allows me to feel that and to know that with some men. And I can tell you right off the bat, sometimes when men come into the room and I just look at them and I know if it's a couple, I know the man is struggling with, I don't want to let my barrier down. I don't want to let vulnerability come up. And then sometimes in individual therapy, it's the same thing. And now I have the privilege of working with adolescents all day, every day at the Meadows, and even watching teenage boys. I mean, this is instilled in us from a young age, watching these 14-year-old boy.
Don't cry, be a man.
Yeah.
Like
and
that shows that you're strong.
It's unbelievable to see.
14, wow.
It's unbelievable to see. So I think being a man in this environment, I really count it as a privilege. Sometimes I know I feel stressed in my head about like certain aspects of it or the direction of my career, and I get caught up in. And then when I take a step back and I'm like, I get to be a part of this. I get to have a front row seat at watching people's lives change, being just a stepping stone for them as they walk towards healing, as they walk towards freedom, and just being someone who has been on the other side of struggle, of just having my own problems, and now having had the stepping stones for me to move forward. I mean, there's no better recipe of providing that for other people than having gone through it yourself, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. I love that you said that. It's like when you go through something, you can relate, and it's in a sense more valuable to you too, to see someone that was in your shoes and get healed. So.
And I'm sure they feel that transparency as well, and that subconsciously maybe helps them to open up in a way.
Yeah. Self-disclosure. You probably know about that plenty. And I think learning how to use self-disclosure healthy as a therapist, where it's not about you, but it includes you, so that you can be real and vulnerable and teach. I can't tell you how many times in therapy, not the only reason, but one of the main reasons that I was able to watch a man become vulnerable was because I finally shared with him, hey, I've had these struggles in my relationship. I've had these struggles in my family. I've had these struggles with this, that, or the other. I've thought about non-existence. I've thought about suicide. I've struggled with substances.
So they don't feel alone in feeling that.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I feel like there's definitely a lot of challenges. Do you have any other challenges from your perspective that men do face with mental health, and how do you address them in therapy sessions?
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge is being perceived as weak. I really think that's the ultimate hurdle for a man, is I just don't want to be weak.
So it keeps them in their head instead of able to open up to you and kind of get the process started.
Pride and shame there are a lot of cultures that operate in pride and in shame. I guess those are like the pillars of their existence, right? You do things a certain way, like, let's just use this example. Imagine a family, right? Let's call them the Johnsons. And they grow up their whole life teaching their kid, we're the Johnsons. We don't do that. We're the Johnsons. Well, you know better than that, right? But think about that on a cultural and societal level.
Romanians.
Right? Yeah.
I know we're going to get into that question, but that's a whole...
Yeah. And so you think about that, even in our culture and community, the level of pride and the level of shame. And it's very powerful, just even looking at it from a third person perspective or a bird's eye view. But pride and shame drives a lot of our resistance. Even think about it when, we're all married here. When we get into it with our spouse, what's the first thing that's happening for you when you're triggered or you don't want to say I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's...
You don't want to... What is that? That's pride.
Yeah.
Right? Or when you make a mistake and you know damn well you made a mistake, shame.
And then you're stubborn too, so.
So I think that in terms of, I don't want to call it a unique challenge, but it might be especially unique to men. I will say that there's plenty of women out there who struggle with pride and shame too. But for men, it's a little bit different, and I'm sure that we will expand in this in a minute, but.
So also now that you're talking about pride and shame, what that kind of takes my mind to is a unique challenge for us as first generation Americans, having had our parents emigrate here. And so a lot of maybe males our age, their fathers grew up and they have these like war stories or like stories from when they were in the military or like living under... Exactly. And like under communism. And so their fathers are passing that on to them. And so it's such a different dynamic, I think, than, for example, just people that are born in America as opposed to us as first generation Americans. Yeah. Because we have our parents, so it's like such a short time between when they came here and they had us that they didn't really get to work through their stuff. Yeah. And so then we see that in our dads, and so it's definitely...
I also feel like being a guy and seeing your dad go through so much that is like physically tough and just a lot, it kind of, I might be wrong because I'm not a guy, but I feel like it would make them even be more of like a man and be strong and have no emotions, because most fathers are like that. Most Romanian dads have no emotion and are very just like straight face, and if you cry, don't cry. And so I feel like that also brings it, 'cause it's like, okay, my dad went through all this and he could be strong, and it's like, no, we need to look at strength in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that kind of goes to our next question about the immigrant community. So what cultural factors and stigmas do you consider when working with male clients?
Great question. So as a therapist, I was trained systemically, meaning I have a lot of different factors that come into play when I do assessments and when I'm in that assessment window. And I mean, as a therapist, you're kind of always assessing with your clients, even if you've been working for a year, you're still like assessing the situation. But for me, culture is such an important part of the work because, I mean, if you think about it, you're going to recognize differences when you work with a white male from even Illinois, right? Versus a white male from Norwegia. Like totally different experiences, right? Or a white male from Romania. And so I notice in my work the difference in therapy and how I approach it sometimes, or some of the conversations that come up with the white Americans or the non-white Americans, and then the white Europeans or the non-white Europeans or Africans or Asians or whatever. And so when a lot of people have actually reached out to me because of my profiles stating that, you know, I have a multicultural lens, that I've lived in Africa, I've lived in Europe.
I noticed that
and
reading the description. So
when people read that, that's one of the main reasons that people who, you know, non-white people contact me. Outside of Romanians, right? Romanians know me because I'm Romanian at times, or somebody puts them, but non-white people call me because they see that in my bio and they're like, all right, let me see what this dude's about. So they'll call me and I have a consult call and we talk about, they're like, oh, so what'd you do? What did, and it's like, okay, I don't need you to know everything about my culture, but the fact that you have some experience or some cultural, that makes sense. Or even just being first generation, just being able to
relate more.
Even that right there is a door in and of itself for people.
Romanian, Asian American women.
I think I said this in one of our podcasts. When I first started going to therapy, I went through like my church, and it was like an American therapist. And our first conversation was like, I want to move away from home, but I don't know what to do. And the therapist is like, oh, are you older than 18? I'm like, yeah, like move out. And I'm like, no, I'm a Romanian girl living at home. I'm not married. Like they didn't understand it. And they were like, no, if you can financially support yourself and you're older than 18, you should be able to move out. Your parents don't understand. So that's when I actually was like, okay, let me search for maybe a Romanian therapist. And I did not think she was going to pop up, but I was like, let's just see Romanian. And it was like Anka's face. And I honestly didn't know her from like the Romanian community. So I was like, okay, cool. And then she's like kind of part of my family. So it's kind of cool.
That's so cool.
But I feel like it is when you're a first generation immigrant, you just relate more and you kind of get the parents and just the community you've gone to.
Yeah. And the other piece that I want to add is that cultural component. If you think about any culture, any civilization, any society, now or in the past, historically, men have been the backbones and the pillars of their societies, of their families, and the foundation. And think about how difficult it is for that man to admit that there is a crack in the foundation.
Right.
To admit that maybe this isn't as sturdy as we thought. It's terrifying.
Wow, that's huge. Yep.
It's terrifying. Imagine you're in real estate trying to sell a house to somebody and you know that the foundation's cracked.
Yeah.
You probably would do everything to hide the basement, to not show them.
True. Yep.
You know, we don't want to go down there. Let's look at our living. Look how beautiful the living room is. Look at the countertops in here, right? And you do that, but you don't want to go down to the basement and show them. And I know you guys don't do basements out here, but in Chicago, where we come from, we got basements.
Hey, I'm from the Midwest
so when I say cracking the foundation, we're talking about the basement. And so just recognizing that men have that struggle, men have that difficulty. It's a little bit different. I'm not saying that men are better or anything like, no, men and women are obviously in the same boat, but men have different challenges than women and women have different challenges than men. And I think just this right here, this machismo, right? I love that term. And I use that with clients all the time. I don't know if there's one in Romanian.
What does that mean?
Machismo.
I was like, is that a Romanian word?
So machismo is, if you Google it, machismo is a strong male arrogance, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? And so probably in English, this is what we would refer to as toxic masculinity, but I think toxic masculinity also falls into a little bit more of a different category. But like machismo is super in the Hispanic culture, it's super in the Romanian culture, and we don't even know what it's called, right? It's this idea of like, I'm a man, I can't let my walls down, I gotta be this, I gotta be that, don't cry, don't. And we talk about it, but there's actually a word for it. It's just in Spanish. I want to know what the word is in Romanian if there is, right? If you're Romanian and you know what the word is, drop a comment below, right? Like we need to know what machismo is in Romanian because we don't know. We're over here in Romanian churches talking about machismo and they don't know.
First time.
Right? But yeah, so that machismo is exactly that thing that we're talking about. That's the label for what we're talking about.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And I love how you mentioned different cultural factors that come into play, because I see this a lot with even my husband. He's Romanian, but he's born and raised in Germany. So we are both Romanian, but we're so different because he's raised in the German culture.
Yeah.
So
like a different
even
upbringing.
that, and so it's very interesting that you mentioned that you have to take definitely cultural factors come into play when you're assessing and continuing to assess throughout the
or like even with parents that I've worked. Thinking about how they raise their children. As a therapist, I saw this when I was in grad school. I remember seeing this in grad school where, I would say majority of the class was I would say more than half was white. And I remember thinking about different cases. We would have supervision and hearing people talk about what families are doing wrong or incorrect. And I'm thinking in my head, bro, you have no idea
how we grew up.
I would sit there in a room with like 5 or 6 other white people, and in my head I'm like, you're tripping. Right. You have no idea what it's like. Like they're like, oh, this is this, and I'm like, you're not them. Like you have no idea what their values are, what their morals are, what they base their foundation on. Like some things are just sacred and you can't change that. Right.
Like the honor culture.
And so like a white therapist trying to tell an Asian person, what's right or what's wrong. And like I've seen that happen in therapy where therapists are trying to tell their clients what is appropriate or what's not. And it's like, hey, we can discuss like societally, like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? But you have no right to tell someone that, oh, this is correct, this is incorrect, or and so I think I've seen that a lot so far, and just being able to take a step back from that and kind of let people express, oh, why is that important to you? Why is that so important to you? Oh, because in my culture and this and that. Oh, really? Wow. So how do you think that translates into parenting for you? Oh, well, and I mean, I've seen light bulbs go off.
I was gonna say that leads to better communication between you and the client. Yeah.
Light bulbs go off.
Yeah, I love that. So kind of leading into the next question, how do you navigate conversations around masculinity, because we talked about machismo, and mental health, especially with male clients from diverse cultural backgrounds?
Yeah, I have to find ways to talk to these clients about what being a man is really like, right? Especially if they share in that experience. And a lot of times, I need to recognize that my definition isn't theirs. And I have to take a step back in that moment and ask them, what is manhood to you? What is masculinity to you? Right? And when you do that, you let them put it out on the table. You let them to figure it out on their own, rather than you be like, hey, a man does this, right? We got that already, and it didn't work out.
Right.
So let people figure it out for themselves. You could be there to guide them. And if they're like, kind of going in the wrong direction, you can kind of rope them back in with certain questions and be like, hey, well, how does that line up with, well, is that congruent with, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's really important for them to figure it out. And by drawing that out, that's something that I've learned a lot with Anka through our supervision, through the work that we've done, is she has taught, like, she is really like the yin to my yang, like personality wise, even as a therapist. I'm very opposite her. I'm very direct. I'm very like, very solution focused, and she's
that's
very.
Such a male thing too, Anka.
Yes.
So like you can figure it out.
Yes.
But I love that, because I remember we'd be in session and I would look at her and I'm like, I know you have the answer, and she'll start laughing. She's like, but I know like you can figure it out. And I realized the moments when I figured it out, it meant more to me, and it was more exciting knowing that I got to the solution. Because I feel like if she just told me it, I don't think I either would have listened or would have like, So it was more exciting when I was like, oh my gosh, I figured it out with her help. So that's like,
I love that.
And just tying into that conversation, being a good therapist is not being able to give your clients the answers. Being a good therapist is helping your clients figure out the answers for themselves. That's really what being a therapist is. That's what I've been learning from Anka. That's really what I've been learning from her and the work that we've done together. And I think that that's probably been one of my greatest challenges as a male therapist. Because as a man, ask your husbands, what do we want to do? We want to go in there and fix the problem and get out.
Solve everything.
Even with my wife at times, like she'll be telling me blah, 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 and I'm trying to fix it. I'm like, oh, she's like, I just need you to listen. I'm like, you're right. Let me do that, right? And so I think that we need, as men, we need to learn how to listen. We need to learn to not have to fix everything. Like, hey, great, you have a flat tire. I don't have to fix that for you. I don't. We could talk about it. I can guide you through it. I could even call AAA for you. But if I'm not available, I'm just not able to. Right. But I think that with men specifically, me being able to explore that with them is probably the biggest thing. And then also another really important point I think for this conversation is around Christian men and why it's so difficult for Christians to accept the mental health component to their life. And I think that I found many Christian men have had this idea that if you're Christian or if you read the Bible or you go to church, it doesn't go hand in hand with depression, God's word. It doesn't go hand in hand with God's word. And it's like, and this is mostly with like the older generation, I would say, but I've seen this in some younger people as well. And it's really difficult to see a man wrestling through his life, wrestling through the challenges, and not willing to open himself up to this other element of like, bro, you have no idea how much healing is in this path.
God doesn't want you to live like that,
You have no idea how much healing is waiting for you on this journey, and you're shutting it down to not in the name of faith or religion or whatever you want to call it. And and it's like you go to the Bible, you turn to the scriptures, and you realize like, God's word lines up a lot more with mental health than we want to admit.
Right. Yeah. That's not even. It's not biblical to think. Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's interesting that, when historians and archaeologists and, different fields of study make advances in their fields, Christians will gobble it up. They'll be like, look at this new discovery. Look at da-da-da-da-da-da. And they'll be like, did you see that the Dead Sea Scrolls have been discovered? And they're like, they're so quick to eat it up. Yeah. But when we find discoveries in the mental health field, when we find out things psychologically that line up with God's word, that don't go against God's word, it's like, okay, that's kind of like, hoopla. And it's like,
yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Right.
So, this conversation, I think, it goes hand in hand with culture. And I'm speaking about this because it's the culture that I come from. Right? So that's why I think I'm speaking more about that now than just generally. But I'm also attaching my experience to what we're discussing here, I think, and maybe probably some of the men that their experience.
Well, I definitely think, it's a sensitive subject, but I like that you brought up, especially in the Christian community, because I don't want to say it's an epidemic, the male mental health crisis, but I've seen time and time again where obviously we're Christian, we believe that the man is the head of the household, and, under him comes the wife, over him comes God. And if the male is struggling mentally, I've seen it so many times. How can the family unit be healthy? Yeah. So it's like you're trying, to fight against something that, first of all, that's not even biblical to think that mental health is, not, or depression is non-existent. The Bible proves that to us. Like you said, so many stories, Elijah and things like that, David. And when you're right, like if we really go through it, and so if you're combating that, but at the same time you're only doing bad to yourself as the head of your household, because you're dealing with so many things you're keeping behind closed doors, and your family's suffering. So we really need to, I love that we're doing this episode. I love that we're bringing it up. It needs to be talked about more and more, and hopefully normalized. And especially I want it to come to the point where it's like, hey, if I'm getting help, like, you know, for my mental health, it should be like if I have a broken bone or something, like it should be like I'm going to the doctor.
Like
that's how
more
important it is.
too.
Yeah, more important, absolutely.
I know families where the husband should go to therapy to figure his things out because it's affecting the family. And instead of the husband going, it's the wife because she's getting affected so bad that she needs the help. And it's like...
And the wife can only do so much. Yeah. And the thing is, we have so many... we hear, I mean, I probably don't tell you anymore, but a lot of criticism from the male population in our community, because they don't like, first of all, I think that we're women. Second of all, that we talk about this stuff. But they themselves, like, I look at their family and I'm like, you're missing the mark. Like, I mean, black and white. Because as the head of the household, that's not how God wants you to run your house. So anyways, I could go on about this.
As you're talking, I'm remembering this was probably a year and a half ago when I was still in Chicago, maybe almost 2 years now. And I was sitting at a table with one of the leaders from one of the Romanian churches. And it was like a family get together. And I remember that he was asking me questions about being a therapist and what do I do? And at first it was curious, but then it was like really accusatory. And I remember his questions went from, oh, so ce faci? You know, what are you doing? I'm, oh, so ce asta? And I remember I was trying to answer his questions as best as I could. And then I remember he goes like, you do marriage counseling? And at the time I wasn't married. At the time I was just dating. I wasn't even engaged. And I remember he goes, oh, you're doing marriage counseling? Man, anybody that comes to you is stupid people. And I was like, really? I was triggered. Internally, I was like a mess. I was a mess. I got dysregulated instantly. Instantly. Just that Romanian trauma instantly got dysregulated. I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's...
And then I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, but cum să-mi spui tu? How could you tell me how to deal with? And I'm like, because I'm not telling you what to do. I'm helping you figure it out. And that was a concept that was so foreign to him of like, we're, I think, used to people giving us the answers growing up. We're used to people telling us like, oh, this is how you do it. Oh, okay, mommy, tati. And boom, you get the answer. And so going through a process where you're figuring it out is foreign to us. And I remember...
And uncomfortable.
And I remember he was telling me how you're not married. How could you? And I was like, okay, let me ask you a question. If I had a ring on my finger, would that change your perspective?
What do you
Literally, he didn't have an answer. I was like, so okay, today I'm not married, tomorrow I'm married. So today I'm not qualified, but tomorrow I am? Help me understand.
Right.
Because it cannot be just because I have a ring on my finger.
Right.
And so I think what he was alluding to was life experience. And it was funny because later that night he found out that I was dating and that I was actually getting ready to propose. And he goes, oh, I didn't know. You should have told me that from the beginning. And I would have cut you some slack. And I'm like,
thanks.
I was like, are you joking? You know? So I was like, there's no way. But this is how we were ingrained. This wasn't his problem. This was a cultural problem.
It's a cultural, it's a societal thing.
That's why I'm kind of happy that we are the newer generation that's being more open. Again, there's still people our age that I know are pretty close-minded, and again, you can only do so much. But I really am excited for the new generation. We're having babies, we're having kids, we're going to be different parents, and it's just exciting to know that we can break those generation curses and see kind of the fruit of that. And I truly believe that the older generation will see that, and God help them that they can also be a little bit more open. And I feel sorry for them. I know they went through so much, and it's like
they did go through so much, but they came to this country for better, and better means that their kids are getting educated and knowledgeable about things. And you can't take just one thing and leave everything else, because my opinion, and again, this is going to cause probably so much, but I don't care. A pastor is like a pastor. He's not a therapist.
Correct.
So it's like, there's certain things, like you don't go to the doctor to get your teeth checked out.
Yeah.
So it's like, we come to this country, you know, God puts this calling on some of our lives to pursue this career and to do it for the Lord. And I really think that we need to just more voices that speak up about the importance of mental health, especially with males. Hopefully it's going to cause some changes to occur.
Yeah. And you know, I think going on that conversation is just saying, just because a pastor is a pastor doesn't mean he can't help, right? In similar ways that therapists can. Like, the difference is a pastor's not clinical. That's the main difference. I think that the problem with a lot of Romanian pastors is it's like, it hurts their pride that, like, what do you mean? Like, I can't help you. Right. And I'm not saying that that's really the attitude of all of them. I'm just saying I've seen that. Or even just in the community of like, you know, well, why don't you just go to a pastor? Well, because not all pastors understand what codependence is. Not all pastors understand what certain struggles are. Not all pastors are able to unpack things in such a way. And pastors don't have to follow HIPAA.
Right.
And pastors can easily, being flawed and human, make the mistake of sharing your information with the wrong person.
And I've seen that.
And therapists are bound by ethical and legal concerns to maintain confidentiality.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I will lose my license if I tell you what you share with me. That's one of the first things that I tell people when they come work with me, especially if they're Romanian. I tell them, hey, one, if I see you at church, I'm ignoring you, not because I don't like you, but because I don't want to breach your confidentiality. If you come up to me and you say hello, fine. I'm whoever you want me to be. I'm your cousin, I'm your friend, I'm your uncle, whoever you want me to be. But I'm not your therapist. And I'm not gonna say hi to you. And guess what? This has happened multiple times.
I was gonna ask, I know it's not one of our questions, but have you actually had like Romanian male clients go to you?
Yes.
That's
I've already worked with a handful.
I'm so happy to hear that.
I've worked with, thankfully, I've worked with probably, I worked with a few Romanians in Chicago before I moved here. And then I moved here and I got a chance to work with, you know, a dozen Romanians easily.
Awesome.
And it's been incredible.
I love hearing that.
From young to older too.
Yeah.
Like from the youngest Romanian I worked with was 12 years old.
Wow.
And the oldest Romanian I was working with was in his 50s.
Wow.
That's so
cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
See, that gives me hope that, like, okay, there are
things
like,
are happening.
Yeah, it starts slow, but it's
and
awesome.
Like, remember, so it was so crazy. Like, the Romanian client that I was working with in Chicago had no connection to the Romanian community or nothing. Just through Psychology Today, and I still get calls from Chicago, from the Romanian referrals of like, hey, do you know anybody? And I'm like, I'm not there anymore. I can't practice in Illinois, so I have to find a way to refer. But there's nobody there that I know of right now. So, but either way, it's been an incredible journey, and just even especially the older men that I'm working with, I can see my own issues coming up working with them because I'm seeing men that are being vulnerable that I'm like, gosh, I wish I saw that. Gosh, I wish I saw that, and it does something in my heart that I have to bring to supervision. I have to talk about, and I have to process and work through.
I wanted to say, is that how you prevent countertransference from happening?
Yeah, I got to talk about it with my supervisor every time that has come up, and you know, working through it. And I think what helps countertransference more than anything for you as a therapist, going to therapy.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I just started up again, and it's been the biggest blessing in my life. I'm actually working with a man who's like in his 80s.
Oh, wow.
And he's been a pastor his whole life. That's and a Christian therapist. And my gosh, the wisdom from this man. I mean, he's a dinosaur, and he's gone through life.
That's a blessing, though.
And he is I love sitting with him. I love being in the room with him because I know you're not just a therapist. You're also a pastor, a man of God. You've led your family, you've led your church, like you've led a congregation, and just knowing that makes me a better therapist. Like, he teaches me how to be a better therapist when I'm his client.
Oh, that's a blessing. That's huge.
You know?
So I guess you kind of hit this next question. What strategies do you employ to create a safe and inclusive environment for male clients? That would start with probably talking about confidentiality, right?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. all the Romanians, I make it a point to address the confidentiality piece. I talk about that in general with clients, but most people who come to therapy have an understanding. Most people who call like, hey, I want to schedule, they know, they are aware, most of them. But Romanians, like majority of the Romanians that I started working with have never been to counseling. This was their first experience. So for me, yes, it's a privilege, but I have to be clear. Like, hey, I actually had, I was working with a family with their son. We had a great relationship, strong alliance, and they tried to add me on Instagram. And the next session, I addressed it. And I said, hey guys, I want you to know, like, I really, really love working with you. And I respect you guys. And I really enjoy working with your son. I think you guys are incredible people, but also we're not friends.
It's like a
right. Like and it was a really hard conversation to have, especially because when we're Romanian, it's like, do you know how many? When I was living in Austria, as soon as I found out, oh, you're Romanian, family. Yeah. So it's just weird for me now in a different context. You're Romanian, I'm Romanian. We're not family. We're not friends.
I'm your therapist, and it's for your
and this is a professional relationship,
and it's for their good.
And I explained that to them, and I said, I just hope, and I could see the disappointment. I could see that they're like, what's the big deal?
Interesting for you as a therapist to feel that,
And it did hurt a little bit. Like I had to talk about that with Anka. Like this hurt me, and she's like, no, I understand. And so confidentiality is one of the biggest ones because I think Romanians especially know what gossip looks like, know what it's like to, I believe that, and this is a strong statement to make, I believe that all, if not majority, 99% of Romanians have either been hurt by or hurt others with gossip.
100%.
And I think that
in our community.
And I've even talked to people who shared stuff openly with a pastor, an assistant pastor, a deacon, and
they heard it
3 weeks later, multiple families were aware of the situation. And it's like, dude, I didn't come to you so you could be freaking the Tribune.
Right.
I came to you because I was looking for guidance.
Right.
And you fudged that up. You know? And so I think addressing confidentiality, especially with, when I was in Chicago, I'm never going to forget, I had a Jewish couple come work with me because I don't want to go to a Jewish therapist because they all know each other. I had a Satanist come work with me because I saw you're a Christian and I just want to see what you guys are, what working with you is going to be like. And I was like, cool, let's do it. He was one of my favorite clients.
Interesting.
One of my favorite clients. But seeing people come to you because of the difference or whatever, and it's like Romanians, if me and you are probably similar, I Google, I need a Romanian therapist, and I would try to find a Romanian therapist. But there are Romanians who don't want a Romanian therapist, and they will make sure, or I've had people call me and say, hey, can you, I know you're a Romanian therapist, can you refer a non-Romanian therapist? And I was like, absolutely. Whatever your needs are, let me help. But I think with, for example, I'll speak to our culture. God forbid somebody finds out about my alcohol usage, my pornography usage. God forbid somebody, hears about my drug addiction, or that I beat my wife, or that I beat my children, or that I'm dishonest in my business. God forbid. God forbid. What would happen? Well, people would see me different. I've made so many mistakes. I have a lot of mistakes that I'm ashamed of that I made, and then everybody saw me different. And I remember the reason I left the Romanian community for a period of time was because I made such a big mistake that I was like, there's no coming back. Like, this is forever, on my resume.
It's like they shun you and you're not allowed back.
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah. So if you can help people feel safe, that's the biggest thing. Can I feel safe? And I don't know if you've probably already covered this, but one of the first things that I learned when I was in grad school was the biggest determining factor of client success in therapy is the therapeutic alliance. That's literally the largest determining factor of, is therapy going to be successful for you? Do I get along with my therapist? Not even do I get along, do I see them as a friend? Do I respect them enough to hear what they're saying? Because I've had clients who have pushed my buttons, and I know that me being direct with them have pushed their buttons, but we've been able to bring it into the feedback, bring it into the room. Hey, I didn't like that you said that. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that. Let me come back. What about that sat with you that way. Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate you letting me know. I just want to clarify, and boom, like those are the healthiest relationships in therapy.
I like that you said that, because I feel like people that try therapy once and they didn't get along with their therapist, they're like, yeah, therapy's not for me. And I'm like, no, like you need to find the therapist that works for you.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, if you're listening and you went to therapy once and you felt like it didn't help, I really feel like try a different person, or keep searching until you meet someone and it's like, okay, this is the therapist I can respect and learn from, and they're there in your healing journey.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal.
And I think one piece about that is also, because of our own struggles, we don't even have the tools to tell someone, I didn't like you said that. So instead of telling them, instead of having that discussion, hey, I'm looking for a new therapist. And it's like, stop looking for a new therapist. Have you addressed with your current therapist your issues with them?
Right.
Yeah.
I literally have a family I'm working with right now at the Meadows, right? And the mom is super offended by some of the things that the kids therapist in the past did, or the organization, She's listing off all these problems. And then I asked her, I was like, ma'am, right? Let's not use her name. Ma'am, have you addressed any of these concerns with said therapist?
Yeah.
Well, no. Why not? Well, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, take a step back, right?
Yeah.
I was like, what would happen if you are able to bring that into the room and use that to move you forward, rather than starting over?
You're just going to run into the same problem with your new therapist.
And then you'll have the same issue, and guess what? I'm walking away. And it's like,
right.
That's probably not a recipe for a successful journey in healing. Is you cannot expect to find healing by just restarting every time.
Right.
Yeah.
Part of the journey for finding a good therapist is letting them become the good therapist you need. But we don't let them become that, because we give up, we quit.
Shut the door in their face.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sorry, you didn't like. He said something. He was weird. She said that.
I just didn't vibe.
And it's like, I just didn't vibe with them, bro. What? Some of the best therapy I've had were with clients who probably didn't even like me.
Yeah.
But because I pushed them and we knew where to go. I mean, it was like.
Yeah.
A guy who had anxiety for 19 years on medication, and we were in therapy for 4 months, and his anxiety wasn't healed. His anxiety decreased severely because I forced him, pretty much. Like, shouldn't say that, but like I kept pushing and challenging him, like, hey, why aren't you seeing a psychiatrist? What's the holdup? And I kept questioning, I kept going back until it probably felt like I was beating a dead horse for him.
Yeah.
But ultimately he went to a psychiatrist, and guess what happened? He got almost the exact same medication. I think one of the chemicals was different, and his whole body reacted differently to it. And his anxiety went from a 10 to a 2.
Oh,
and his whole life shifted. His wife came in and she's like, thank you. The kids were ecstatic about it. They reported, and he is more like, he's been in a different position ever since. And it's like,
it was worth it.
He needed that really direct therapist to do that with him, which he did not have before. Pastors, actually, this particular client, pastors, they tried praying over him. They tried everything they could in the church, and they didn't know what to do. So guess what they did? They reached out to a Christian counseling center and said, hey, do something with them.
But that's why we need people like you to figure out, like, on the clients and what to do.
So, I mean, that was incredible. I know, like, it's like we're talking about stuff and like things keep popping up in my head. I'm like, oh, this is
No, it's cool.
I love it. It's a wealth of knowledge. So from your experience, how do family dynamics within immigrant communities affect the mental health of men, and how do you support them in managing these dynamics? I know this is a pretty loaded question.
Yeah. These 2 books that I brought with me, Unspoken Legacy and Facing Codependence, they'll probably add the titles and the authors. These 2 books have impacted me more than a lot of other books when it comes to my own personal journey of healing. And yes, now I'm biased to these books because I work at the Meadows, and both of the authors of these books are fellows for us, and but they have contributed so much work to the Meadows. But these books outline pretty much so many factors in our lives that we have overlooked or haven't really noticed. Or have you ever read the book Boundaries?
Yeah, of course. We talked about it.
One of my favorite books.
So that book, you read it and you go, this is common sense. Throughout the entire book,
Yep.
you go, this is common sense. This is common sense. This is common sense. You finish the book and you're like, the whole book was common sense. And it's like, okay, how much of that common sense did you practice?
Yeah, like how much are you applying to your
Right?
life?
Yeah.
Almost none. And so this is
so
this is kind of like what that is, except it's a little bit more informative. For me, it was a lot more informative in just having an understanding of what codependence looks like and understanding what does trauma look like. And this book really helps paint the best picture of what trauma looks like. And then, yes, it also attaches kind of like how addiction and trauma intersect and why addiction tends to happen where there's been trauma.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is being able to, and this has nothing to do with immigrant or non-immigrant, being able to be open to resources, being able to recognize like we want to break the cycles, the generational cycles that have occurred in my family and my mom and dad's family and my grandparents' family. Like we want to break the cycles of alcoholism. We want to break the cycle of codependence. We want to break the cycle of unhealthy communication, of being triggered with one another and yelling at each other and breaking things. We want to break the cycle of divorce. We want to break the cycle of physical abuse. Like we want to break the cycle of all these things. And we need resources for that. And I think whether you're Canadian or Romanian, Bosnian, Brazilian, I think it doesn't matter geographic location and culture. I think we all need to have some type of an avenue to get one step closer. And I think sometimes it's just an additional resource. Sometimes it's just an addition. This podcast. I bet you, I don't know, because I'm not I don't read what your DMs look like, but I bet you there are people who have DM'd you and talked about how much this has helped, or one of their episodes is really, of your episodes has really helped them, or really tough, right? And this is what we need. We just need more avenues to kind of reach people. And so I think that when you just consider, especially trauma and codependence, I think those two are I want to say 95% of issues that you have, that I have, that my wife has, that my friends have, that my parents have, 95% of them are tied into things that both of these books point out, codependence or trauma. And once we can finally begin to unravel that big ball of yarn, we'll start to understand, oh, so this is why Romanians, oh, this is why, oh, so... And then you start to...
You see things differently.
And you empathize, and you're like, oh my God, you lived through communism. Like, you literally were in fight or flight all the time. It must have been so foreign to you to be in a free country now and not be persecuted for your faith. And not have to walk around with tension in your shoulders because, you're
going to get thrown in jail. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think really about it's being able to provide resources to these communities, being able to provide resources to our communities. And I think that people wanting to get this information is really important, really important.
I love that.
Yeah.
So kind of lastly, to wrap up today's episode, in your opinion, what steps can immigrant communities take to promote better mental health awareness and support specifically for men, and how can therapists contribute to these efforts?
Yeah. Well, I would love to say open-mindedness. That would be the solution.
We all love
But
I
think, and I'll start with our community. I will start with the Romanian community, that we can start by taking initiative in resourcing ourselves. You have friends, read this book, recommend it to your friends, say, hey, buy a copy. This book is $9.99 on Amazon.
Yeah.
And it even has a workbook, a follow-up workbook. So this book and the workbook together are like $25. If you genuinely sit with this book, read it fully cover to cover, highlight, take notes, and then you get the workbook, you don't have to do the whole workbook, just like different bits and pieces.
Yeah.
You will do far more with this book and the workbook than you would in maybe 15 sessions with a therapist, potentially.
Yeah.
Not always, potentially.
So I'll say about that, I've never been to a therapist, not yet.
Okay.
And I had a pretty crazy upbringing in childhood. If you guys know me personally, but like I said, I've never been to a therapist, but one of the most pivotal things in my healing was, like you said, resources. Anything from books to podcasts. I just ate it up, especially when I became a parent. I knew I needed to change, and break cycles, like you said. And the most pivotal thing was resources and having my husband to kind of talk me through, and just listening, being there to listen. Those two things, I have to say, changed me so much.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So it's really,
and we have
true
so
to what
much
you said.
nowadays, our internet,
Praise God.
just like YouTube, TikTok, and mostly everything's free.
Right.
And what, $20 is like 3 cups of coffee.
Yeah.
So
Straight
it's like,
up.
what is that really?
Straight up.
Yep. So
So-
you just have to want it, though, for yourself. And I think self-awareness
I agree.
is the first step, maybe.
Yeah.
And being like, hey, I don't like where I'm at. I want to change. What resources are there around me that I can kind of grab onto and
I
use?
do want to piggyback on that because I feel like books do help a lot, or just other resources. But me going to a therapist, in a sense, holds you accountable.
Oh, 100%.
Like, we have a session and she's like, okay, so next time I see you, these are things that maybe you should work on.
Yeah.
And then I would leave home and I'm like, okay, I see her in a few days. If I don't work on this, and obviously therapy too is like, it's when you put money towards something, it's an investment. So I'm like, I better face these and figure it out, because next time I see her, she's going to be like, so what'd you do?
Yeah.
And so it's like those times in therapy really push you to really face what you need healing on.
Straight
100%.
up.
And like you said, it keeps you accountable. Yeah, I agree 100%.
Straight up. And I think just, your average layperson like you and I doing this for ourselves, we can be literally the light on the hill, right? And let's use the Christianese. We can be the light on the hill for people to be like, hey, this book really, I've given this book to so many people and recommended it. And then they reach out. I've had people say, this was a better parenting book than parenting books.
Wow.
This isn't even a parenting book.
Pretty cool.
Right?
Cool.
So
Codependence.
it's an unbelievable resource. So this is only 2. And there are so many out there,
I know.
right? And so, like, The Body Keeps the Score, and, some of Bruce Perry's books. And, I mean, there's just so much out there that if you sit with and you come to it open, and especially as a Christian, you say, God, open my heart to what I'm missing. When you do that and you add that to the mental health
He'll
work,
show you.
everything else changes, right?
Absolutely.
Especially when you invite him and say, Lord, I'm broken. I know something's not cooking here, but I need you to fix it. I need you to make it happen. I don't know what it is, but I'm really, and you go into it with that mentality, God doesn't move. God doesn't move. And so the second thing that I want to touch on is, I think having our churches promote mental health more, promote these books, promote these resources is important. This woman, Pia Melody, is actually a Christian.
Awesome.
And you read the book and you don't even know it until the very end when she says, she talks about the Bible very little.
Yeah.
I don't need to be a Christian and profess Jesus Christ in everything that I do, because when I live it, that speaks volumes more than any words I can speak. And how can I live it if I'm not healed? How can I live it if I haven't even begun to touch my PTSD? Am I trauma? Am I this? Am I that? My addiction? How can I? Right? And so part of us helping others is literally continuing to do this podcast, continuing to pass on resources and give them as gifts. And I think churches should have dozens of copies just ready to go for people. Hey, if you guys want some resources, whatever. And so when we can kind of bring that wall down and have even mental health discussions, our church right now, the pastor's doing a kind of a parenting thing for mental health, and providing resources and understanding. And part of that is just having the discussion and letting people ask questions. And that reduces the shame around it. That reduces the shame around, or even if you're in therapy, some people are really ashamed of being in therapy, but some people are I know you were super about it. You were my therapist, and you were super open about it. And I thought that was great, because
I was maybe too open.
maybe, right? Maybe. But I think that also spoke to some people.
Yeah, no,
It did.
Again, I said this in another podcast, I would be open about it. And after, it kind of was awkward. Sometimes people were like, oh, and it was just uncomfortable. And then those people in the group would message me later,
secretly,
hey, what therapist? And I'm like, why can't they be open like that? But it's because people are going to look at them differently.
Yeah.
And what's also funny is when I went to therapy, technically my life was like perfect. And I was going to therapy because of the past things that happened to me. So I remember people were like, oh my God, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm actually doing pretty well. But now I'm ready to face everything that I've dealt with in the last 10 years. So I can't imagine being like the male version of that, because again, it's a whole
probably amplified times 10.
Yeah, I think so. And then probably the last thing that I would say is YouTube. YouTube is an unbelievable encyclopedia of resource. And what I was saying almost jokingly was, I think I learned a lot more about being a therapist and mental health after grad school, right? Through my actual work, through my supervision, and through YouTube. I got a YouTube premium account now for I don't even know how long, because I watch so much YouTube. I've literally watched interventions on YouTube. I've watched people explain. I watched Pia Melody talk about codependence before I ever even heard of this book. And it was like a video that was recorded on VHS. And like the last 15 minutes of that video was actually like, I guess somebody forgot to cut the tape and it went to like a TV commercial or something, and then it like was a TV show. And so like those are on YouTube too, right? And so there's just so much out there. And like, you want to know more about boundaries? YouTube, boundaries. I follow so many therapists on YouTube. I follow so many mental health pages on YouTube. Another one, Alabaster Co. That's a great resource. You want to practice mindfulness and you want to add the Christian lens to it. Christian mindfulness is a game changer for believers, because all that hoopla, mindfulness, meditation, Satan, whatever. It's like, no, it's not. But when you get to understand what it really does, being present, being grounded, knowing what your body's feeling, knowing where your heart's at, knowing where your mind's at, and then you add the spiritual element to it, game changer.
Yeah.
So all of these things, I think, are pieces. I wish there was like a more clear or direct answer, but I don't think there is. It's like, just keep doing your stuff. I'll keep doing my stuff. We keep sharing resources. We keep doing things together. We all collaborate. And that's really where it comes down to. And I believe that there's a reason that God is using us now in this generation, because I'm looking at the generation after us, and they're in for another world of trouble. Very different challenges than we had.
You'll be a parent soon.
You'll see. very different challenges than we had. But guess what? Now we'll have the tools. Now we will have the right screwdriver, the right hammer, the right tape measure, the right everything to be able to say, hey, this is what I've learned. This is what I can help you with. And still give us grace to make mistakes as parents. Still give us grace to mess up and be like, oh, I guess I didn't know that still. That's okay. Yeah,
I love that. And I think without even knowing it, that's what our parents came to this country and hoped for us.
Yeah.
And, hopefully they'll, like you said, we'll be able to make changes. For sure.
Yeah, I
think
so.
That was the perfect way to wrap up the episode.
I hope so.
Jason, this was a wealth of knowledge. I'll definitely be listening back to it again. Thank you so much, Jason, for making time. I know you too. Thank you for coming on and making time to come and talk to us today.
My pleasure.
We're going to link those books that Jason mentioned in the description for you guys. We'll also link Jason's Instagram, but don't add him if you want to.
No. I probably won't add y'all.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for watching today. Go ahead and subscribe to all of our channels so you can get caught up with any new episodes that come out. And we'll see you guys again in 2 weeks.